So feel free to ask me questions during the course of the discussion in the session. I'll try and give you or answer your question and give you more information on what you're asking. But if there are things which obviously cannot be covered in the session, then the idea would be to try and provide you some additional handouts. And these handouts, hopefully, along with the presentation will form the construct of you crystallizing some of the, discussion that we are doing. And it helps you hopefully understand the learning outcome more comprehensively towards the end. Now, one of the things that I want to start off with when I say, this is the first unit, at least with me on this particular course. So a lot of you who are looking at obviously taking this course up is a flagship course on strategic management and leadership. And, the whole idea of this course or the reason behind you study this course is to look at either topping it up to an MBA or at least understanding from a point of view of, let's say, developing your understanding and knowledge about various aspects of how various departments actually work within the organization. So some of the units that you're going to cover in this in the course of studying this particular program will involve you getting knowledge and obviously insight into different departmental areas of the organization. So you'll be looking at studying HRM, you'll be looking at studying marketing, there'll be a module on finance, there's a module on organization behavior, which is essentially, if I put it in my own context, essentially this particular module is more of strategic management and leadership, but under the frame or the banner of what is called organization behavior, because we get to see the concept of leadership and management essentially being tested or obviously being implemented within an organizational context, and that is why the unit is termed as organization behavior. But essentially most of the learning outcomes that we're going to study in this unit are going to relate to leadership in the first one that we're going to start off with today. The second learning outcome is going to be focused on understanding organization and organization structure, and how the structure essentially allows us to understand what kind of a culture and ethos of the organization is. But sometimes you go and visit certain companies or certain businesses, and you get an opportunity to see how the organization is structured, or how the the whole staff employee partner structure actually works within the organization. Gives you a clue in terms of how the culture of the organization would be, whether it's if it's a flat organization, if it's a hierarchical organization, if it's a functional structure, whether it's a mix and match or a matrix structure. You generally get a good sense and an idea in terms of how the culture of the organization would be, how the nitty-gritties or how the departmental structure of the organization would be. And then the third learning outcome, we'll be looking at understanding, after we understand leadership, management, the organization structure and culture, we'll go into third learning outcome, which is going to be focused on understanding what motivates employees, staff, people to work within an organization. Why do managers and leaders focus on different aspects of things? So leaders would focus on long-term motivation and let's say long-term demanding or creating schemes or structures which basically create loyalty between the organization and the employee. But when you look at managers, they are more focused on productivity, efficiency, getting the best output from the employees. And the third learning outcome is going to be focused on understanding how some of the operations within the organization are measured from a point of view of effectiveness and let's say performance related aspect of it. So here we're going to be looking at understanding key performance indicators, looking at how measurement of key metrics can be done, things like the balanced scorecard. We look at how an appraisal system works within an organization. Why is it required? Or what are the different forms through which decision-making process happens within the organization? And they could be through appraisals, they could be through management by objectives, looking at the balanced scorecard, 360-degree appraisal. Why learning in the organization or training and development within the organization is important. And then the last learning outcome, we're going to be looking at why managers are focused on making sure that there is a lot of motivation, that the environment and the culture and the structure of the organization is working in such a way, or it creates some sort of a culture and a structure that what they want to be able to do is motivate people essentially to work within the organization. And when organization is able to provide the resources, they are able to provide, the basic, let's say, requirements are fulfilled from an employee's perspective, whether it's needs. So we look at the motivation theories, different types of needs, whether it's physical needs, hierarchical needs, whether it's, needs which are predominantly related to, so let's say in the five strata pyramid that we see a lot of different types of needs. So psychological, physical needs, money related needs, when we talk about all that, so the last learning outcome is going to be focused on, understanding motivation, why motivation is important within the organization. And, we look at some of the motivation models and how organizations create motivation within the employees within the organization, which is through incentive schemes, bonus schemes, which is primarily through, sometimes you would see reward schemes which are done, safety related schemes, which is so that employees feel that they are wanted within the organization. There's a bit of longevity in their job and employment of, with a particular organization. And then those needs which help create belongingness, or a sense of loyalty between the employee and the organization, is what we're going to be studying in learning outcome 4. So essentially looking at 4 of these learning outcomes. We start off with leadership and management, go into organizational culture, structure, go into employee efficiency, efficiency and performance related aspect, and then lastly go into why motivation is important, how motivation techniques are employed by managers and leaders in order to get objectives and strategic objectives done and completed, and how do they look at productivity and efficiency, and what are the various other tools and techniques which managers and leaders have to be able to create motivation for employees when they work for an organization. So all in all, the unit has a very mixed content. I generally class this unit as mostly related to strategic leadership and management, because it is more focused on the role of a manager and the role of a leader, and these are tools. When we talk about KPIs, when we talk about productivity, efficiency, these are tools, these are things which managers are more focused on. But when we talk about motivation, when we talk about various kind of needs which are fulfilled from a perspective of what the organization is able to provide in return for the work the employees or the staff does for the organization, is what more the leaders are focused on. So a fair bit of indicative content in order to cover this unit up. And we're going to be starting off with learning outcome 1, which is predominantly focused on understanding the leadership behavior theory and practice. So we are going to be looking at leadership theories first, then we'll go into some of the interaction and behavioral theories of leadership, and then finally look at analyzing some of the leadership theories and how they bring out different behaviors from people and staff within the organization. So I normally always start off, the presentations with looking into some key terms and terminology which are quite important for us to lay the foundation in terms of understanding, some of the key terms which are involved or are basically in the learning outcome 1. Now, one of the things that I come across very clearly is a term called leader. There is a term called manager. And then what we want to be able to do is differentiate between the two. Now, when we look at the basic definitions of who is a leader and who is a manager, I think, there are various definitions which come across, or various ideas which come to mind. But when we look at doing a bit of research into who is a leader, I would look at saying that somebody who is able to influence some of the other people or group of people within a organization, business, or say, for example, a firm, and is able to get them behind a common objective. And that is what I would say a leader would be. Sometimes when you say practical situations and you are in a situation wherein, say, for example, if you're in a mall and you've gone to a particular, place or you're visiting a particular place, we see this in our day-to-day life. Sometimes, when you're driving in the road and there is a traffic jam or something which has happened, which has caused an accident, you generally see a lot of people will stay in the cars, but there will be one or two which will come out of the car and, try and guide the traffic, or, try and ask people to, just calm down a bit, or, they start looking at coming out with a solution in terms of how to get the traffic moving in. And a similar situation would be when you are in a mall and there's a bit of a chaos, or if something has happened, we generally see some people will come forward and, try and help out or take the initiative of helping out. And then a lot of other people start to follow them to try and, clear things out or, help solve and resolve some of the issues which we get to see. And that is a situation where you see somebody stepping up to the role of being a leader, because what they are showing is initiative, what they are showing is a bit of a drive. They are showing some sort of independent thinking that, okay, if I go ahead and, obviously try and resolve this, it will probably help us help close this problem, or help solve this problem or an issue. So when we talk about a leader, essentially people who are able to get other people behind themselves, influence others by their ideas, would generally be termed as, people who are showing certain leadership traits, or, people who are basically acting as a leader in a particular situation. Now, the key aspect of this, when I add this to the organization, would be that a person who is able to influence others, but is also able to influence them in the positive direction to be able to help them achieve a goal. So sometimes when you go across to your manager and you're getting stuck and you're trying to do a job which is being given to you, but you're getting stuck in a particular place, and what you do is, in order to get some guidance and some ideas, you go across and have a discussion. In that case, you are basically having a discussion with your manager wherein you're discussing a problem where you're getting stuck, and obviously the manager is offering some solution or, giving you some ideas in terms of how to resolve that problem. So that situation might be slightly different from a situation wherein you're required to take initiative. So when we look at, on the other hand, say for example, a manager would be a person who's responsible for overlooking or, let's say managing a certain side of operation or activity within the company or a department. And in this case, the person who's responsible for managing that activity has the overall responsibility, or is sometimes, as we say, in charge. That means the person is in charge of that particular department or a group of people, and the output or the work is actually dependent on the manager in terms of how the manager essentially is able to, kind of delegate that piece of work and then get that done at the end of the day. And a simple example of this, when I say, is when you work within an organization which has a lot of, people working together, or if you look at a particular, say a piece of machinery wherein there are lots of moving parts, sometimes you would see that, taking an example of computer, which I normally end up doing, is because if you look at, there are lots of things which are working together on a computer or a PC or a Mac. So you have a monitor, you have a display unit, you have a graphics unit, you have a keyboard, you have an audio, a microphone, a CD drive, and things like that. But there is a central brain somewhere which is basically controlling all this. And that central brain, I would term it as maybe the software. Now, if I look at from a hardware perspective, it might be the processor. But here, the central part of the operation is being controlled in terms of what will happen if I press this, or what kind of result will I get if I execute that command, is all being controlled through the software. So similarly, when you see managers are people who are going to be looking at working with a lot of different types of people within an organizational context, and they will be in charge of managing, supervising, planning, controlling, coordinating, or reviewing a particular function. And that is why they are going to be called managers, because they are essentially looking at getting a desired output, from, say, a group of people who are working under them or working with them. So when we talk about leaders and when we talk about managers, sometimes what we'll have to do is basically look at the literal definition of it. And when we look at the literal definition of the word manager, it basically says a person responsible for controlling or administering, or say, for example, if we can put this into a context of an organization, administering, controlling a group of people, and that person will be called a manager. So in the restaurant manager. If you go to a bar, it will be a bar manager. If you go to a marketing department or a department within the company or the organization where you work, somebody who's a department head or has the responsibility of the overall working of that department would be the manager, because that person is basically supervising and managing the work which is required as an output at the end of the day by the company in order to get things done or in order to achieve those objectives. So in terms of the definition of a manager, in terms of definition of a leader, these are basic literal definitions that we would want to have an understanding on. That manager would look at being responsible for a part, or say, for example, a part of the company department, and they are responsible for producing the output, or making sure that the coordination is there in order for the output to be produced if they work with a team. And a leader is somebody who is able to get people behind, an idea, or get them organized in a way wherein they are able to follow him, help in the achievement of the overall objective of the organization. Now, when we talk about subtle differences, if we have to look at educating ourselves and say, okay, what are the differences between leaders and managers? So there are certain things which come across quite clearly, which are depicted on this table, and they would generally be things like managers are focused on things. That means they are focused on the present. So if you are a manager, you would see a sales manager would be focused on weekly, fortnightly and monthly targets. But if you look at leaders, they are focused on people. So they are more keen on ensuring that we have the right people with there is a fitment of a person in the job, which would ensure the success in the long run. So there is a slightly different objective and a goal when leaders look at people. Managers would also look at people, but they'll be focused on what skills you bring to the profession, what experience you have from the background, and that would help them, get things done quicker, in a much more cost-effective manner, maybe a productive manner. But when you look at leaders, they're always on the lookout for finding the right skills required to be able to do that job for which they would want a person to come in and work. Now, managers are focused on doing things right, because they are managing, they will look at making sure that every time an output or a work is given, it produces that output, it produces, things, or, if you're in a production department, if you're an engineering manager, then your aim would be to ensure that the process produces the same output every time it is run through the assembly line, or if it is run through in terms of production line. Now, leaders are focused on doing the right things. So when I say doing the right things and do things right, there's a slight bit of difference. And that difference is the same as, can I get a glass of water? Or can you get me a glass of water, please? So there's a subtle difference. But here again, when you see leaders, they are focused on how can we do and reach a particular solution, by doing it in this way. So they are focused on getting things right so that once it has been set, and once the path or the way through which these things can be done is invented, then it can be passed on to the manager to follow that as a process, and that can be done time and again, repeated time and again, to produce the same output every time. Managers are more focused on planning, because one of the key functions or key 5 functions that we look at which managers are responsible for is planning, organizing, directing, controlling, reviewing. Those are the key activities of managers. So leaders are more focused on inspiring. So they will always look at, sometimes when you go across to sales conferences, annual conferences which happen within the organization, you would generally see that, you bring across key speakers or guest note speakers, because here the board or the chief executive or the top management of the organization is focused on setting a tone for how the employees would see the targets this year. They were looking at more closely to set say an example, or, set some sort of a guidance in terms of where the organization is heading. And that is where you will see they'll make use of keynote speakers or influential speakers who would be coming across, delivering motivational speeches. And the idea there is to inspire. The idea there is to get people behind the idea in terms of how things would work out in this year, or what are the main objectives the organization is looking at achieving this year. And similarly, if we go on, we are able to look at, a lot of differences, which are subtle differences. But if we look at them literally in a bit more detail, you would see that it clearly differentiates people who work as managers and people who work as leaders within organization. So planning, organizing, directing, controlling, the basic aspects of managers. But if you look at leaders, they are inspiring, influencing, motivating, and they're building teams essentially to enlarge the scope of what the teams can actually handle in terms of work. And sometimes you would see that managers, they are very keen on following the rules, because There is a set specific budget. There's a set specific tasks which have to be completed. And obviously, if you put a manager in charge of a product launch, say a company is doing an event and they need to do it in a certain amount of budget, you would generally see that the events manager would be looking at all the aspects of the budgeting side of things, how the planning needs to be done, how it can be done in a way wherein, obviously it could be managed within, say, a certain amount of finances, a certain amount of time frame, and then creates the success, which is defined as objectives given to the event manager. Okay, you're looking at responsible, you're being made in charge or responsible for this product launch, which is happening. These are the various, resources you would get. These are the people, and that's the end objective. But if you look at the leader's role, they'll be more focused on understanding, okay, what is the core idea that you're going to present in the product launch? They'll be working on things like the presentation. They'll be working on things which will create a lasting impression of the people who will come and attend the product launch. And there the focus is going to be looking at the central or the core idea, which will actually be the defining part of how the event actually works out in terms of what the opening statement would be, or how would the layout of the event would be, or they'll be more focused on things which are going to lead a lasting impression of that organization when the event is being done. So there are lots of other differences that we can cover between managers and leaders. Now, any questions on this so far?
Yeah, Raman. So
go on.
Okay, I'll go on first.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, so I was you made a point that managers and leaders have different set of rules and responsibilities. So in
Yes.
this case, what I understand is that a person can be both manager and leader at the same time, right? It's something which is not like it has to be different only, or people are different only. A leader can also be acting as a manager, but where in the team it's required for him to inspire or motivate, then the role shifts towards the leadership, right?
There's a slight bit of difference here is generally when we look at this concept of managers and leaders, what you would generally see in practical sense would be that people with a number of years of experience, which have, over the years, they've worked in various roles, they've developed a lot of skills, and they've racked up a lot of experience at some stage would then get into leadership positions. You would not generally find people starting off working within the organization and suddenly, taking up the leadership role. That does not happen in the practical sense, and that is what differentiates how managers over a point in time, after gaining experience, there are concepts of coaching and mentoring which sometimes tends to happen within the organization because you're asked to shadow somebody and then you're asked to pick up traits and qualities which are required for you to become a leader. There is also a concept of training and development which sometimes organizations and HR put certain employees through because they are showing exceptional performance, they are meeting the targets, they are obviously understanding the objectives of the organization, and year on year they are contributing more. So at some point in time, some managers could be trained to become leaders in the future within the organization. But generally speaking, people start off, when they start off in their career, when they start off within the organization, you generally see that people will, be working towards becoming a manager first. And once they become a manager after a number of years of experience, expertise, and, say, for example, gaining a lot of skills, over a point in time will then be given an opportunity to become or step into the leadership role. And that would primarily happen because of their knowledge, because of the experience, and because of the work environments they've worked within. And that allows them to understand some of the basics of how they would, work when they step into the leadership role. So leadership as a concept happens over a point in time. It's a gradual, gradual process through which a person could become a leader or a manager could become a leader. But generally speaking, apart from family-run businesses or businesses which have, grown as family-run businesses over the years or generation after generation, you normally do not see a person stepping into the leadership role from day one. Just because, it only happens in family-run businesses just because they have that lineage and that advantage. But over a point in time, in most global organizations, you would generally see people start off as managers and over a point in time acquire the skills, traits, qualities to become a leader and step into a leadership role.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. Got
Okay, good stuff. Sarmad, any questions at your end?
No, that's great. You clarified the same question I had.
Go on.
No, that's all. I had the same question. Thanks.
All right, okay. So you would generally see that what tends to happen in organizations would be that there are what is called people who would be identified, within the organization as people who can become a leader. They show the potential qualities or traits of becoming a leader, and that is where the HR or top management within the organization would spot those qualities. And these qualities, when I say, are qualities which are coming in because they are working within the organization, meeting the targets, hitting the performance parameters, the KPIs, and then they are able to win the trust of the management. They are able to create, opportunities through which they are able to win that trust by engaging within the role, and that allows them to be, identified as people who can actually take up a leadership position within the organization over the years. So it is not something that, obviously, there are theories that we will study wherein we talk about trait theories, wherein, some of the scientists or earlier philosophers and authors actually also propose that leaders are born. And in those cases, a person depicts those qualities, could be classed as a leader. So over the years, centuries, these theories have also been tested with time. And obviously, at this instant, what we do not see is that leaders are not born. They are leaders can be made. People can acquire leadership qualities, and there is no such case that you're born with that trait or you're born to be a leader, and that does not happen. So this concept has evolved, and that is why it is important for us to understand that when we talk about the word and we use the word leader and manager, we need to be fundamentally clear in what context this can be used, how and when does a person in this position show that quality, that trait, has the ability to lead or influence people. Then the person is a leader, and the way he's leading and showing those qualities would be the concept of what is, the process through which the person has gone through, and then shows that those consistently shows that traits, and in that case the process is called leadership. So similarly, managers would be people who are doing right things. They are able to do it every time, if given a job, given an opportunity, given a task, they're able to produce the same desired output which the management wants. And at the end of the day, what happens is they would show this particular, trait time and again. And in that case, what will happen is the process through which they are dealing and they are continuously controlling, directing, planning, organizing things, which is when I say things, I mean people, then that process would be essentially called management. So when we talk about and broaden this now into in terms of leaders and managers going into the concept of leadership and management, what we are going to see is that the qualities and the tasks or the way through which this is finally enacting out in an organization and happening consistently would be the process through which we will say this is a person who's continuously showing and acting in a way wherein he shows, acts, and is able to influence people's opinion within the organization, and we see him as a leader. And because he's showing that quality in that particular aspect of being a leader repetitively, the process would be leadership. So when we talk about management, again, this would be something which is related to the fact that in this case, the person essentially is involved on a daily basis, on a routine basis in terms of planning, controlling, directing, reviewing, various aspects of the business. And this could be involving a group of people, teams, departments, and that is where his main aim or her main aim is to primarily look at reaching a goal, achieving an objective, and the process through which this is being done in terms of the approach would be called the management approach. So when we look at these subtle differences between the two, leadership versus management. We're looking at very clearly understanding that, leadership is more focused on, so when we talk about terms like mission and vision of the organization, at some stage, whether it's a small business, it's a startup, we look at, an established business or a company or an organization, a global company, whenever they start, at some stage, you would generally see that the vision, mission of the company is always defined. And they are normally either done by the founders, the owners, the people who started that company off, even if it's in any of the sectors, any of the 30 sectors, financial, retailing, whatever, production, engineering. At some stage, you would see the ethos of the company. Why does the business come into existence, or how does it create a differentiation from some of the other, competitors in the market? All that is defined by maybe the founder and the owner of the business. So in this case, they are more focused on setting the direction, creating the vision, and the reason why the business will actually exist. And they are qualities and traits of, people who would be in that position of leadership, and they would be writing that. So when you look at a startup company, you generally see the person who comes up with the idea, obviously there is a core team, and that core team essentially is very is keenly focused on essentially differentiating, establishing that idea, and also enrolling or inducting people into the organization which will buy into that particular idea. So they are people who are going to be in the leadership team because they understand the product, or they have created the product or the service, and that may be a unique product or a service. And because they understand how this needs to be marketed, they then start to get and expand their team. And that expansion of team tends to happen with people who can actually buy into that vision and then start doing the steps or the things which are required to basically, make it a reality. And that is where managers or people with those traits or skills are required to be able to step in. And then, they look at enlarging the team. So sometimes you would see the core team looks at the direction of where the company is going, what the product would be providing, what kind of service would it need, or what would it provide to our customers from a customer's perspective, where the finances will come from. But when you look at employees within the organization, they'll be focused on, am I getting paid at the end of the month? Okay, this is what I needed to do. Have I delivered that? Have I met my target? Is there something else that I need to do? So they are focused on point-to-point side of things in terms of getting things done, and and making sure that what was actually entrusted to me or given to me as a responsibility at the end of the day has been delivered. A simple example: sales manager, and you have a general manager, and you have a director. So if you have a strategic business unit, you look at an example wherein the director at the top would be more focused on ensuring the P&L, would be looking at market share, would be looking at sales numbers, revenue, target, profitability. But if you look at the sales manager, his role will be very clear. I'm a manager. I've been given a target X to drive in terms of revenue, and that is what I need to do. Now, sometimes you would see the manager would come back and say, okay, I have a big client who has ordered so many of these and he wants X price. You would go back to your general manager would look into the P&L, look at if that is possible. If not, we'll cross-check with the director, say, okay, we're gaining a client, that is a bulk order, would it be possible? Then the director of the business would look into understanding, whether the P&L is possible, whether there's profitability, and whether it makes sense for us to do it. So he's looking at all the aspects of the business, whether it will be produced on time, whether we can scale up and give that price, is that going to be worthwhile in the long run, and is it gaining the client important for the organization or the strategic business unit? And that is where leadership role comes in. But from a management, it's operational, it's on a day-to-day basis, it's more looking at tasks and opportunities and looking at, how things can be done, and obviously looking at ensuring, the task which is given is completed on time, and that's my job done. So in order to look at explaining this concept, let's look at two different videos. One of them predominantly, which is a TED Talk video by one of the very influential, speakers, Dave Ramsey, and he's delivering, a talk which basically explains the role of leaders, and how do we perceive leaders in the 21st century. So let me switch this over to the screen and let's listen in. We're not going to listen to the whole full video, but looking into this video for the first 2 minutes just to see how does he define, leadership.
All right. You're the CEO, that's the Chief Everything Officer.
10 people, you're still doing like the work. And you're the CEO, that's the chief everything officer, you know. I mean, you do whatever it takes. You know, you put the screens up in our business, you set the chairs, you do whatever. You do whatever needs to be done when you're small. You just get her done, you know what I'm saying? And finally I said, well, we got to have some other leaders to lead and guide and help these people. And I didn't know what I was doing. Y'all, I was 30-something years old. I was 32 when I started. I was a boss. I wasn't a leader. I didn't know what I was doing. But I thought, we're going to teach leadership. We're going to teach leadership. We're going to teach leadership. I want you to think with me for a second right now. Think in your mind, visualize someone that you think of when you think of a great leader, a world-class leader in business, in ministry.
So think of a term in your head or think of a person that you see as a leader, and we'll discuss and look at a few examples, what comes to your mind.
I was going to say in politics, but I won't. Somewhere in some space, you think of someone who is a great leader. Got their face in your mind? Now, I want you to think about some one word character qualities that describe a great leader, a world-class leader. Now, pick your favorite one in your mind and raise your hand. I'm going to call on you, and then you're going to yell real loud so I can hear what your favorite one is. Yes, sir, right back here. Loud. Inspiring. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Tenacious. Yes, sir. Loyalty. Good. Yes, ma'am. Magnetic. Yes, ma'am. Loves people. 2 words. Yes, sir. What? Integrity. Thank you. Yes, sir. Patient. Yes, sir. Passionate. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Hardworking. Yes. Humble. Good. Here's what's interesting. I've done this thousands of times. And the answers are so predictable that they're pre-printed in your workbook. Because you and I are in agreement that a leader has integrity. A leader is a servant, a leader is humble, a leader is charismatic, a leader is influential, a leader is visionary. We may have used some slightly different terms, but we were saying that all through this room just now, and all of you all over the world watching this were saying the exact same thing in your setting. That is a leader. Is that a leader? Say yes. And so if you think that you want to be a leader, or you think you are a leader, to the extent that that's not you, you suck. To the extent you're going to hire someone and put them in a leadership position in your organization, to the extent they're not that, you got a problem.
So I'll stop this here. I think if you look at this connotation in terms of what he's trying to bring across is when sometimes you have conversation within the organization or the place of work, and sometimes you would see that when you see certain people maybe on a very, ad hoc basis. That means you don't see them that often. And there are people that you see on a daily basis. So that itself gives you an idea that people that I meet on a daily basis would be people who I work with on a day-to-day basis, or they are either my peers or my colleagues or are my superiors. And they normally would fall into the manager's position. But there are certain people in the organization that you see maybe once in a month or once in a fortnight or, during conferences or annual conferences and seminars and things like that. And you get a sense and idea in terms of that, okay, these are people who are actually leading the organization. They might be people that you might not work with directly, but the output of the work that you produce basically reaches to them. And sometimes when you get a note, an email, or when you get to see them, they acknowledge who you are. And you would generally see that these people are people who are driving the direction of the organization or are driving the output which is required from the organization. And that is where you see that they would be people in the leadership position. Sometimes we come across people we generally see wherein you would normally see that, okay, if there is a message which needs to be gotten across, you would see that that message sometimes people are able to say through a very influential or through a very charismatic side of things in terms of telling you a story. And that story sticks in your mind as an idea. Okay, if I have to get something done, I might just call you and say, okay, can you get this done just before, make sure that before you go today, can you get this report onto my table? But there are sometimes instances wherein what will happen is that if you are required to do something, you'll have a discussion, there is a story, there's a narrative, there's a background which is explained, and that sticks in your mind. And that does not need to be told to you again and again. And that is where you will see the subtle difference of somebody coming across to you, maybe as a superior, as a colleague, as a, as somebody who works within a different department or the same organization, but is basically implanting an idea which will stay with you like a story. And you tend to remember it more often than the ideas or things which come across to you from different people. And that is where you would see that they would be people who are having that uncanny ability of putting the same message across, maybe in a very different way, wherein it sticks into your mind. And that is where you would see that this person would be somebody who is more influential or carries more weight, and obviously, in some instances would be a leader. Let's look at another video. And this is from a perspective of looking at understanding, the definition of leadership from a point of view of, let's say, different people from different walks of life, or, different ages.
Okay.
A leader is a person who leads a big group of people. For example, the president, he leads the whole United States. And the principal at my school, she leads the whole entire school.
What is a leader?
Somebody who leads something. Somebody who leads a marching band so they can make great music. Marching like in a parade, so they like have a baton. That is a leader.
A leader is when someone guides a group of people when
She needs a bit of a cue.
they need help. Somebody who is always there to guide you and like show you the light. And like when it gets dark, he can like light a torch of knowledge to guide you.
Yes, they kick
Follows a leader.
Yeah, they did. In my school, it's a line leader, and they'd be in front.
Is responsible for the people or animals or things for what happens and tells what other people do.
A man or woman who makes the world a better place. Someone who judges you and you have to follow him whatever he does. And it has to be someone who's very nice, not bossy, and not annoying. A leader is somebody you follow and tells you what to do. It's somebody that has like control and confidence. Kind, generous, and really nice and really sweet.
Or, what is a leader?
I can explain. He has to lead the way, and the other superheroes have to follow him. Like Spider-Man.
So you get the idea in terms of, when we talk about people who are essentially inspiring, essentially making things, asking people to get things done, or in some cases, you would generally see, there was a very good example somebody put across was, my head teacher is a leader. You also look at when you're in a band, or you're in an orchestra, if you're playing, the main person who's actually leading the orchestra is a leader because everybody is following him. So basic essence of how you get into that position is if essentially you would normally see people following you and are convinced of your ideas and obviously the way you put them across, that gives the colleagues, peers confidence, and obviously then they start to believe in you, and in those cases you would see people with experience, with knowledge, with skills, with right attributes when we see that the person needs to be nice, person needs to have integrity, passion, and they are people who start to exhibit, leadership qualities. So when we look at very clearly understanding, and when we want to get now after this, when we get into leadership theories, we will clearly understand that, why it is so important that we are able to distinguish between when this term comes across and when it says, okay, you're a manager, you're a leader. Who's the manager in the organization? Who's the leader in the organization? It's very easy to spot that difference and identify it if you know clearly the differences between the two terms, the two concepts, or the two processes. So when we talk about, in general, leadership and management, we will always come across things which will be, looking at, again, I'll give you one practical example. Sometimes if things are not going right in the organization, you generally see the top management of the board or the chief executive would call, certain people within the department and say, okay, this was the objective, this was required to be done, but this is where we are as of now. What could be the logical progress which could happen in the next few days? Now, if something drastic has to be done, you'd normally not see the top management or the person in the leadership position actually firing an employee. Now, if they feel that the performance is not being met and, if the targets are not being met and there is drastic action which needs to be taken, the person in the leadership position will call that meeting, and then with the different department heads of where the problem is, identify that problem, and then make them realize that this is the problem which we need to resolve, or these are the issues that we need to resolve in order to move forward. And then if a worst case scenario, a very harsh decision has to be taken, you would generally see that will be taken by the manager, that you are going to be fired. Reason being that you are not performing, and it is not going to be the leader who's going to be doing that. So you would normally see that the tasks which are supposed to be carried out or are carried out on a day-to-day basis, even in the case of hiring, recruitment, selection, any other practical scenario that you look at within the organization, business, wherever you or at your place of work, you would generally see that will be the person in the managerial position which will be tasked with that job of actually doing that role, not the person in the leadership position, because they're going to be focused on understanding the root cause of the problem. And if the problem has to resolve, they will bring together the team, they will have a team meeting, they will discuss it out, make sure that the message gets across, and the required action is taken at the relevant manager's end in order to resolve or solve that problem. Now, when we get into, understanding various definitions and, concepts where there are differences between leadership and management, what we've discussed so far was maybe literal, but when we look at it from an organizational perspective, we need to give some boundaries to it in terms of, how do we differentiate management and how do we differentiate leadership. So we look at things which are pertinent within the organization or businesses at some stage, have this developed within the organization. They form a part and parcel of the employee handbook, the vision and mission of the company. So some of the things that I would normally categorize them as would be, if we look at a process in terms of where the organization is going, who would have the responsibility of doing it, and how do we differentiate between who is in the leadership position and who is in the management position. So if I take one example in terms of vision establishment, when you look at planning, budgeting, you look at developing processes, policies, or, procedures which are required to be followed, it'll always be managers doing that. It'll always be people who have these skills, abilities, prior experience to be able to work in those situations. They would be involved in doing those functions. But when you look at people in the leadership position, because it's related to vision and vision establishment and what the organization needs to achieve at the end of the year, at the end of 3 years, 5 years, if it's a strategic plan, you would generally see the direction in terms of setting the direction where the organization is going, whether it's going to expand from 10 people to 200 people, or whether it's going to expand from one office to 2 offices. That would be subtle differences that you will be able to spot which people in the leadership position would take, and those decisions that they take could be because of various other, when I say other, variable parameters. Variable parameters could be, he's the owner of the business. They have significant amount of experience in working within that side of the business. They've been employed as an external consultant. and they are the ones who are involved in setting the best practices in the organization. They are the ones which understand how the organization would shape up in the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and they are involved in writing the strategic plans for the organization. And those would be people within, leadership, or, carrying the aspect of leadership, or depicting the aspects and functions of what leadership requires. You look at HR, one such other function. Now, there are various functions in HR. I'm pretty sure that you would have come across, when we talk about human resources, we talk about human resources development. We talk about human resources management. We also talk about international human resources relations, or human resources, when I say HR relations. Now, these are all clearly the remit within managing of resources in the organization. But if we look at in a bit more detail, you will generally see that there are very clear differences between when I say manage human resources management, when I say human resources development. The D word is related to development, means the focus of this department currently for the next couple of years, when the organization of the business starts up, is development of the HR policies, development of the staff, proper training, procedures to be set, and that is where the department is HRD. But over a point in time, if the business is established, there's a set structure, payroll administration, training and development, unions, you're looking at recruitment and selection. If all the procedures are established, you generally see it will be a case of human resources management. Because at that stage, the organization's processes are very well set, and you would generally see that the organization in terms of HR function would be more so to ensure that the resources, the people, and the, let's say the people which are one of the resources within the organizations are getting the adequate, let's say resources and facilities to be able to perform best in their function to deliver on the objectives. So here the concept of HR would do or change to managing of those resources to ensure that we have got physical infrastructure, administrative, financial resources, but one of the most important resource which controls everything, we need to be able to manage that, and that management of that resource would be human resources management. So there would be training, development, there will be lots of other things which are provided in terms of skills, reskilling, and they would be all looking at enhancing the existing skill set of the organization. And that is where the leadership will be focused on. So they'll be focused on, are we getting the right people with the right skills to be able to perform and take up this role? Now, if you have somebody who's responsible for product engineering, and he's the top person in the product engineering department, the leadership will be focused on, can we get somebody from competition? Can we get the best resource identified in the market? This is the requirement. They create the job spec because they would want that person to come in and drive that function. That job spec is then going to be initialized and acted upon by the management within the HR department, and they would set, doing a bit of benchmarking on salary, remuneration, compensation, benefits, look at what experience is required, and then they would start doing the headhunting. So the development side of things would be leadership. The management side of things in terms of getting the person in, getting the interviews done, shortlisting, and then finally going in front of the top management for the final, decision making would be the difference that you would get to see when we talk about leadership and management as processes. So this is where we can clearly establish differences between what people work within a management role and how people work within, or what kind of people work within the leadership role. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So okay, good stuff. Let's quickly get into, some of the other bits that I want to link in with leadership. Now, we've understood what is management, what is leadership, who's a manager, who's a leader. Now, over the years, a lot of work has been done in terms of identifying different styles. And there are 4 broad styles that everyone agrees, and this is something that we need to be aware of. So when we talk about leaders or people who exercise that authority in terms of dealing and working their way through within the organization, they exhibit a certain style which basically is identified as either of the 4 leadership styles. And the reason why we say this is that these are now, very well documented, very well accepted, and a lot of, let's say, reasoning experimentation has gone behind it, and this is now a fact. So there are four styles. One is authoritarian, the other is paternalistic, the third is democratic, and the fourth is a French word which is laissez-faire. Now, these are four different identified leadership styles that we get to see how people act within the leadership, position. So when we talk about broadly these four styles, they basically help us identify when you're working with a particular person in position of authority, or a person who's able to, make major decisions within the organization, and how that person behaves. We will identify that particular style to any of these four styles that we get to see when the person, shows a certain behavior, or exhibits a certain characteristic, or, acts out in a particular way. We will identify this with these four styles. So the first style that we talk about is authoritarian. That means the person is going to be, fully autocratic. That means one of the ways that I could put this across would be that in this case, the person would say, okay, you either do things my way, or you, leave the organization. So the main concept is that the power, and when I say power, I mean decision-making power, is concentrated within one person, and there is no concept of delegation. So here, the power could be on the basis of financial, aspect of it. It could be on the aspect of maybe shareholding. It could be on the aspect of, being the owner of the organization. But what essentially that means is, when we talk about authoritarian style of leadership, you would normally say a person, has absolute power and is not willing to do away with that power, and, obviously expects people to adhere to that particular authority, and, in this case wants, or the person or in this position, when they show this particular behavior, you would generally see that they work with a carrot and stick approach. If you get this thing done, that's the reward that you can get. And you generally see this happening in, situations like, if I look at sales-driven organizations, if I look at organizations which are starting up as new businesses, you would generally see that the owner of the business has the experience, has the skills, knows what he needs to do or how he needs to do, and that's where the position that person is in, and the way the dealing of that, way he deals with his staff, people, employees around him, shows that the person has, full authority. And that authority could be financial, as I mentioned, could be owner-driven in terms of control. It could be driven from a point of view of not looking at delegation of responsibilities, and that is where we get to see this particular style, which is authoritarian. And the word authoritarian essentially means, you have to, there is a lot of concentrator of power within that person. And that could be any sort of power, whether it's financial power, as I mentioned, whether it's shareholding, whether it's, if you look at a business, it could be the director of the company, but he's also the majority shareholder. And in those cases, if it's a family-run business, then obviously shareholding is with the family, and that is where they wield a lot of power, and that is where this style of leadership normally is seen. Now, in paternalistic leadership style, what we do see is that the leader basically looks at, working within the organization, but looks at driving things within the organization from a point of view of looking at what is also best for the organization, but at the same time, what is best for its employees. So in this case, the person is showing characteristics or trait wherein they are more focused on ensuring that, the people who work for them and the people who basically carry out those day-to-day responsibilities are also cared for, their needs are cared for. And in this case, the person has a softer side in terms of dealing with people or staff in the organization. Yeah. And that is where the term paternalistic comes in, because the person in that position acts like a father figure. And here, the person tries to generally get consensus around how things is done. And that is where he's more, or the person in that position is more exhibiting style wherein they're focused on, getting people behind them, getting them motivated, and ensuring that they have a buy-in to the proposition, and that allows, this style of leadership to prosper. Now, in this style of leadership also, you would see that there is very little delegation. There is delegation, but the delegation is again minimal. So it is not, again, there is concentration of power because the person is seen as a father figure, is seen as a towering figure or an overarching person with a sense of responsibility and power within the organization. But there is a softer side to that person towards the employee, and that is where he tries to build, or she tries to build, or the person in that position tries to build a relationship network to ensure that the employees are also cared for within the organization. Now, in the democratic side of things, when we look at here, the person works as a people's person. The person tries to take across everyone, tries to build consensus, and here the decision making can also be devolved. That means if the person in the leadership position sees involvement from other team members within the organization, sense of ownership, then the person confidently also delegates the authority in terms of decision making to other sets of, let's say, people or members within the team. And that is where, this style of leadership is generally seen as very popular within organizations. Now, if I have to give you a simple example of authoritarian leadership, you normally get to see them in a lot of companies wherein, or let's say an example, which is the army. So if a general gives a command, whether it's right, wrong, whether it's leads to a right result or not, everybody has to follow that command. And that style of leadership is authoritarian. And the person has supreme authority. When we talk about paternalistic, here what you will generally see is that an example of this would be wherein a person is primarily in a position wherein they have the ability to be able to make even wrong decisions. So sometimes you would generally see that in organizations, which are basically, let's say, engineering organizations, when you look at, examples of organizations in the production side, you generally see a managerial approach which develops over a point in time, or a leadership approach which develops over time. And in this case, sometimes because of the immense experience, skills, and background knowledge which the person has acquired over the years of working within the organization, he or she becomes a dominant figure. And when you look at that dominant figure kind of a status, you would generally see that in organizations like that, you would see this style of leadership, being, kind of, let's say, enacted. Now, an example of this would be Carlos Ghosn. Now, if you see, he was in the news in the last year or so. He's the chief executive and the chairman of Nissan Motors, Citroën and Renault Group in France, and obviously one of the very, influential person in the automotive industry or sector in the world globally. Now, he was caught up in some sort of a fraud and scandal, but because he had 35 years of experience of turning around organizations who were making losses, and then he also oversaw the merger between Nissan Motors and, Renault and the Citroën within the French side of things, he was seen as a very father figure, because he was responsible for bringing the organizations together, synergies, and obviously created a large conglomerate, which obviously, became quite profitable. Now, if we see why this scandal has happened, is because he was treated as a father figure, a lot of decisions were not questioned, and, the management had blind faith on that particular person. What they've seen over the years is that he's also misused his position and abused his power, position of power. And that is where we saw, he was able to create, let's say, networks or pockets of loyalists within the organization, which always defended him. And that is where we get to see the paternalistic style of leadership with which some of the organizations that he headed, like Nissan Motors, and you look at the Renault Group, or, in France, this is where we get to see the paternalistic side of leadership as an example coming through. Now, obviously, it went wrong over the years because of whatever reasons, but we generally get to see that this is an example wherein you would see that he was treated as a fatherly figure, somebody who was untouchable, had lots of years of experience, and obviously people had to, there was no question of people actually. No reason why people could actually question him because of the authority and because of the power he had in that position. Now, when we talk about democratic leadership styles, there are lots of companies which show this. And when you look at a lot of American companies, when you look at a lot of large conglomerates, global companies, you would see that the style of leadership in these companies is pretty much democratic, because the structures are such that there are, functional structures, there are matrix structures or hybrid structures in place because of the business and the operational side of things are quite huge. There is a lot of involvement, a lot of people working within the organization, and at some stage, people within the leadership position have to delegate the authority of decision making in order to speed up the, let's say, processes or actions which need to be taken, and that is where you get to see, democratic style of leadership. One other example which I'll say, to a lot of extent, this is debatable, but a lot of people say when Steve Jobs was at the helm of Apple, his style of leadership was autocratic. He scrapped a lot of projects, which meant Apple wasted a lot of money in R&D, but he had a very clear vision in terms of bringing out products, and that is what we get to see why Apple is so successful. He said one of his clear aims and objectives in life was that he never wanted to compromise with the user experience which Apple products would get when they buy that product at a certain cost. And that is what drove him to create some of the products or the iconic products that he was responsible, and that is why what we get to see is Apple is so, successful. So if you read his autobiography, you generally see that glimpses of that come across very clearly that, there were things which he wanted his way, and he wanted designs in certain way. He wanted the products to come out in certain way, wherein he was very clear that it is either my way or the highway. So his style of leadership was treated and seen as autocratic style of leadership. Now, we look at democratic style of leadership. There are plenty of organizations globally in which we see this happening. So if you pick up organizations like Microsoft, you look at picking up organizations like Google, you generally see that here the people in the leadership positions have empowered their employees if they have shown the skills, the knowledge, the passion, and the ability to be able to lead the organization to a new direction. They have allowed that to happen, and that is where you see some of these organizations have actually, taken over a lot of companies over the years. A lot of mergers and acquisitions have happened. Some decisions have gone right, some decisions have gone wrong. But because the core vision and the core objective of the top management and the leadership was that we need to be able to expand and be successful, that has allowed people to make those decisions, and in this case the decision making power was devolved. So when you look at Microsoft's decision of taking over Nokia and getting into the smartphone space has actually not paid off, but that's a decision which was allowed to be taken by the then chief executive, Steve Ballmer. And then this particular acquisition of Nokia has not resulted in Microsoft being the third most important in the smartphone space, but again shows that the board at that level allowed that decision to happen because they felt that this had all the relevant ingredients of being successful, but obviously they have kind of done away with it. You see that happening with Motorola being acquired by Google. And the reason why the management acquired Motorola, you would see that the management acquired Motorola because of the 13,200 patents which the company has on telecom and telecom equipment related products, which they see can be incorporated into the Android operating system. So again, there is a democratic style of leadership which is working because at each of these strategic business units, you find different people with different skill sets, different visions, but the clear singular vision is to create success and obviously grow the organizations into a position wherein they can enjoy strength, and that is where you see, the democratic style of leadership. Now, the last one that we want to briefly look at is laissez-faire. So when we talk about, this particular meaning of the word laissez-faire, here what tends to happen is the leader basically is going to totally make him or herself aloof of the decision-making process. So here, the basic bits is that what the person is trying to do is basically leave things to take their own course. You allow to do things. You allow things to take their own course. So laissez-faire literally means you leave things as it is, you leave things alone, and you allow them to take their own course. So in this case, the leader delegates the responsibility of day-to-day decision-making to the people who are involved in the process of working together, teams, and the leader believes in total delegation. So the decisions are taken by employees, by managers, and there is total freedom, you would normally see that the person would give in this position to his team because he or she feels that the people have the skill set to be able to make the right decisions, and given the task and opportunity, the staff, employees, teams would make the right decisions which are correct for the organization and, would work for the organization. So in some cases, it is also said, that this style of leadership looks at abdicating. That means giving up the responsibility of decision making altogether. So if something goes wrong, it's not my responsibility. It's a collective decision which was taken. So this type of leadership was also seen, and you generally see this style of leadership happening, in various organizations which are service driven. Sometimes you see this happening in even within the political setup, governmental setup, and you will see sometimes people in the position of power or government will make minimal interference or minimal, efforts to interfere in some of the economic activities or the activities of the, activities and affairs of the country. And that is where you see laissez-faire style of leadership, because most of the decision making is done by bureaucrats, and in this case, they delegate the responsibility. So the minister at the helm of the department, the energy minister, the health minister, they are basically enacting or giving out what has been already decided. So the decisions are essentially done by the bureaucrats on the basis of reports, statistics, factual data, and that is where you get to see probably, laissez-faire style of leadership happening. Now, this has also been, I've basically described it into a bit of a table that we get to see, and we've looked at recapping some of the advantages, disadvantages of each leadership style, just to, look at them in a bit more detail from a perspective of analysis. Now, one of the questions which I would look at is, or ask you would be, which style of leadership is more effective? Have you ever thought of it? So this is a question that you need to think about, that sometimes when you work within an organization, or you've been a part and parcel of a team, or, been a part and parcel of a project which has delivered certain, objectives, what kind of leadership styles you've seen or have experienced, and which one has been most effective. So this is something that sometimes you would see that would come across in different situations, in different walk of life, because sometimes you see the autocratic style of leadership would work. Sometimes you would see a leader would need to be democratic, showing democratic in the sense devolving or delegating more decision making locally to his teams, because they have the ability, the passion, the skills, and the knowledge to be able to take those decisions. So there is no one right answer to say in what situations, what kind of styles would essentially work. Sometimes you would see a leader showing an amalgamation of all types of styles depending on the situation that they are faced. And sometimes because of the decisions that they have to make, they would, fluctuate from using one style to the other, because the situation would demand it, or, they would need to make the right decisions, and that would require a particular style to be used in terms of, passing a judgment or essentially making a decision. Now, any questions on this so far?
No, not from me.
Nothing from my side.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Now, what we are going to look at essentially after the coverage of the, learning outcome broadly, if I go into just the unit specification again. So what we've done is we've done a very broad coverage of understanding leadership management, differences between leadership management and different leadership styles. Now what we want to be able to do is go into some of the assessment criteria very quickly, just to go through some slides, and they are more directive. So in the sense, when I say the first one, we look at, forget the word evaluate for a minute, but the task essentially says discuss different leadership theories. So now on the slides, if I go in from slide 20, I'm looking at putting together all the leadership theories that we need to be aware of, and how they've come across over the years, and how they are, categorized. So when I talk about leadership theories, essentially we're going to be talking about, various types, and they would be divided into, looking at trait theory. We're going to be looking at the major developments and how they've come across over the decades and centuries. So we have a behaviorist approach, we have a cognitive approach, we have a constructivist approach, and then we have a social, and the last, or the 21st century approach is a transformative approach. Now, There are lots of leadership theories. There are 21 different types, but when we group them into the schools and the thought from where they originated, we broadly classify them into these 5 different types. So leadership theories could be behaviorist theories. They could be on the basis of behavior the person exhibits. It could be cognitive, constructivist. It could be social or situational, and in some cases it could be transformative. Now, to give you a simple example, if we look at transformative, here we are talking about leadership theories that we generally refer to as transformational and transactional. So when we look at the example of Michael Dell and Dell Corporation, which was a very successful PC company in the late 1990s, early 2000s, started to see a collapse because the build-to-order model was a new model, and obviously it had taken over its competition like Hewlett-Packard, Lenovo, IBM, a lot of other competitors like Compaq and stuff. And at that point in time, the idea was very revolutionary. And once they got the model right, Michael Dell obviously led the helm, and he left the company. He was the chairman, and obviously they started to the company was then managed by different people, different chief executives, and as we see over a point in time, the company started to decline in its revenue, its turnover, and obviously went into losses. And the reason why that happened was that the company's leadership failed to realize the changes which were coming in the market. Because when we look at from 1995 to 2005, PC was at the center of internet, and that was the central device to be able to access most of the functions and features that we use from internet, emailing, whatever it is. But after 2005, and we step into say 2007, 8, 9, you see iPhone being introduced, smartphones coming over, tablets coming over, and that is where the company did not realize that the market trends were changing. So the leadership style which Dell as a company exhibited between I would say 2000 to 2010 was transactional. They were happy with the model and they were happy with what they had created, but failed to realize what were the changes coming in the market. And then when Michael Dell came back to the company, took it private, took it off the stock exchange, bought the company again, and then started to transform the company from just being a PC company to a cloud, to a server, to other side of services, enterprise side of services. You see the transformation happening in the company, and the company again slowly and gradually returning to a position of strength. So we see that people within the organization were driving some of the things transactionally because they felt they had hit the right model, and that allowed the company to get its revenue and profit. But over a point in time when it failed to realize that the market and market trends were changing, the company's business and revenue started to decline. When Michael Dell came back again and took over the company, took it private, oriented the business model, and that is where he transformed the organization to not just meet business to consumer requirements, but B2B enterprise side of things. And that is where the company has now become again, has come back into profitability, and, is one of the significant or dominant forces within the enterprise cloud computing space. So we see an example of how leadership has enacted out in this organization from a transactional to a transformational side of things. So when we talk about 21st century leadership, we generally talk about transactional and transformational leadership models, apart from some of the others. But this is where we get to see that when we see how general leadership theories and development has happened over the decades, we see that a different kind of an approach has been applied when we see how this concept of leadership has evolved over the years. And this is broadly classified into 5 broad, types. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, when we talk about, so briefly looking at, each of them. So when we talk about behavioral aspect of this, we talk about the 3 basic theories which we generally get to see, and they tend to be, when we look at the evolution of how the, concept of management and leadership has happened, you would generally see that, this is something which is originated off with the scientific experiment which Frederick Taylor and Mayo carried out in the early 19th century, and that is where they were called the classical theories. Then at some stage they went into what is called the Mayo's experiment, which was the human racial relationship experiment which he did, and Maslow's and McGregor's theory, which is basically the theory X and Y. And they started to look at things which were in addition to what drove performance and, drove people to complete and, achieve tasks within the organization. So motivation became one of the important aspects of how leaders and managers could get work done. And that is the neoclassical approach. And then we look at the modern approach, which has come across in the 1960s when we see technology being implemented into various processes. Post-World War II, when we see, and that is the neoclassical approach, when we see a lot of production, manufacturing starting at a major scale. So when we see, large factories being created for washing machines, refrigerators, a lot of people started to work within factories. Human relation, HR as a department became quite important in the early 60s, because one of the main things which managers and leaders needed to work on was how to look at controlling human resource. Apart from financial, administrative, infrastructure, all the other resources, fine. But one of the main resources which was driving and utilizing all these resources, you would see that the HR side of things started to become important in the post-World War II era. And that is where we see again the importance of motivation coming in, benefits coming in, you're looking at employee getting holidays and things like that. This is the gradual beginning of how we see the behavioral approach stepping into to ensure that, it was not just the carrot and stick approach or the basic as pretext of providing, goods, facilities and infrastructure where people would want to work and, get work done. But the other aspect of things started to come in, and that is where we see the evolution happening. And that is where you see the behavioral side of things coming into being. Then we talk about social behavior, so socio-behavioral. And the reason why we talk about this primarily is, again, when we look at, why it is important for managers within the organization to understand what are the various types of demands of individuals. Now, again, if we put Maslow's theory of hierarchy into context here, you have different types of needs. And when we talk about different types of needs, Maslow came up with this theory in the 1950s, which also influences the leadership theories, is because he classified needs into 5 different types. And when we talk about physiological needs at the lowest level, we talk about safety needs. That means you want job security, you want longevity in your job. Then we talk about belongingness, which means you are loyal to the organization cares about you. You see small things happening when you are 10 years within the organization. Some organizations have a policy to reward employees that if you've spent 5 years, they give you a watch or something as a token of, appreciation. In 10 years, you get something, maybe a chairman's medal. In the 15 years, you get something else. And then 20 years, you get an employee stock option plan. And all these things are related to belongingness. And obviously, at some stage, when you rise up in the organization, your esteem needs. That means you want a feeling of accomplishment. You want a title. You are looking at, because you've done this for a number of years, you at some stage require different things. Now, when we talk and relate that to behavior, similarly, within the organization, when people work, they show and exhibit different behaviors. You're motivated by money. Somebody is motivated by power. Somebody is motivated by position, title, the type of responsibility they execute. So all these are behavioral aspects of, what we generally see when sometimes leaders would have to look at, adapting to various leadership styles while still ensuring that people and, people within the organization or within the team tend to, be convinced and, obviously do the jobs which is expected of them. So the social learning side of things in terms of behavior, attitudes, and the reactions which employees would essentially show were incorporated primarily into the socio-behavioral theory of leadership. And this is also one of the major types that we get to see, which sometimes you would look at when leaders actually look at, using Laissez-faire style or democratic style of leadership, would be because in the organization, the business and processes are quite well set. People and employees show a lot of, essential skills and traits. And in this case, the leader in that particular organization has to look at the interpersonal angle of it in terms of getting things done. And that is where the behavioral side of things need to be considered from an individual perspective, from a team perspective, and they have to address these in order to be able to get things done. Then we talk about interpersonal relationship theories, and they also tend to be quite important because here the key aspect is that the leaders in some organizations, when the processes are well set, you would need to have clear relationships in place or clear lines of, say, authority and clear lines of delegation to be in place so that it allows and provides that space for employees, departments to be able to work together and deliver on certain objectives. So there is not much interference which is required, but if there are things which required in terms of, pulling up, or there are things which are required wherein there is close coordination required to be able to produce results, then in those cases the interpersonal relationship model tends to work, which allows the aspect of things or work or objectives being accomplished. Now, when we look at broadly classifying various of these theories, which could be under the three approaches that we've talked about, the classical approach, the neoclassical approach, and the modern approach, there are lots of different types of theories that we have to understand and how they link into motivation theories. So this is just a mind map of, and there's a handout on Moodle. The reason why this is important is that some of these motivation theories have also taken, let's say, have got influenced by some of the leadership and management theories which were proposed in the 19th century, the middle of the 19th century. And what we get to see is that we get to see some influences of this then being adapted into what is the different, leadership styles and the different, classification of leadership theories which have happened over the, over the years. So this is something that we are going to cover in Learning Outcome 3, but just a snapshot here in terms of to ensure that when I say Frederick Taylor's scientific experiment, how it informs the classical approach, when we look at how some of the theories were being framed up in the 19th century, when we talk about Mayer's approach, the Hawthorne effect theory, wherein he placed the importance on teamwork and social collaboration, how they are looking at the neoclassical and the behavioral approach theories. And when we talk about, modern approaches, we look at the theory X and Y, we look at McClellan's theory, we look at Herzberg's theory, and some of these then start to play in that when people are motivated within organizations, they can be motivated by conditions of work, pay, status, and they tend to, influence how the leadership styles are enacted within the organization. So it would be good to relate some of these and have some knowledge, because we are going to come back to this in Learning Outcome 3 or 4 when we talk about motivation in general and in a bit more detail. Now, very briefly, going into, so any questions of this on this as of now at this stage?
Everything's clear for me.
Okay. Now, when we go into 1.2, which is basically looking at the analysis of some of the theories and how do we relate them specifically to, an organization in terms of the interrelationship working of, the theories which are probably the behavioral and interpersonal relationship theories of leadership. So here, again, when we look at this general classification, which has happened in theories, we would be focusing on understanding the behavioral and different leadership styles. So the 4 styles that we have covered pretty much in terms of, autocratic, paternalistic, laissez-faire, and democratic are the ones that we need to be able to discuss here with a particular aspect of an organization. Where do you get to see this style particularly being enacted, and what are the various leadership traits which are basically, important when we see a particular style of leadership being exhibited. And that is what is covered in some of these slides. So here we are talking about traits. When we talk about different traits, styles, skills, knowledge, which people show in the leadership position, we need to be able to understand and interpret them from a point of view of analyzing them and relating them to the different leadership styles. There's a particular article on Moodle which basically has some of the extracts that I've taken on this presentation come from that, which is a globe study which has been done to study the global leadership behaviors. And this basically, when we saw one of those videos, when we came across certain words like inspire, charismatic. So what they've done is they've kind of defined the various leadership styles on the basis of, these traits. And they are kind of reoriented as charismatic and value-based, team-oriented, participative, humane side of things, autonomous, and self-protective leadership styles. So this is one such journal article that you would be, it would be a good article to read to see the 21st century interpretation of how leadership styles are influenced by relationship and behavioral side of things within the organization. Then I talked about transformation and transaction. So there's a slide on this which basically puts more, meat on the bones in terms of what is transformational side of leadership and what is transactional side of leadership that we get to see. So some basic details that you can go through to understand, these side of things. And then when I look at these 6 different styles, what I've done is I've put a slide together for each of these styles here, so that you understand when we talk about different leadership theories, which are essentially defined in the learning outcome detail. There's the indicative content here, as you see, this particular indicative content. So what I've done is I've taken out and discussed each of these theories which relate to one of these 6 styles, and I've put together 1 or 2 slides for you to look into a bit more detail on the presentation. Is that okay? So this is something that is explained with an example, obviously a theoretical descriptive thing which you need to go through to understand, the 6 different styles that we get to see when we talk about relationship, interaction, and behavioral aspect of leadership in a context to the organization. Is that okay? And the last one basically talks about, how we need to analyze how different leadership behavior impact the organization. So here, when we talk about if a leader is showing autocratic leadership style and is showing a different, a particular behavior in terms of how they act out, when they perform day-to-day functions, how does it impact the workings of the organization? So here, this is an extension to the different leadership styles, but the main aspect that we need to be looking at is understanding the theoretical framework, which is called the Mintzberg 10 management role framework. So Mintzberg, in his book on management, which is Inside Our Strange World of Organizations, which he published in 1990, talks about the 10 management roles and why they're important when we look at considering leaders showing aspects and, or using certain characteristics of management to lead the organization. And these 10 roles that he came up and defined in his Mintzberg 10 management role, included things like figurehead. So we can further divide them into figurehead, being a leader. Sometimes you are in a listening position. You're a monitor. You're managing most of the things, and your people are responsible and answerable to you. You're acting as a disseminator. You're a spokesperson. You're an entrepreneur, disturbance handler, resource allocator, and negotiator. So these are various other styles of within. If I identify that I'm an autocratic leader, that's fine. Okay, you're an autocratic leader. But within the autocratic leader, what characteristic or traits that you show? Are you a figurehead? Are you a leader? Are you a listening person in the listening position? Are you between the top management and the operations management? So are you a chief executive? And what kind of work you do? So he defined them into, 5 basic types. So interpersonal, when you have leadership style, wherein what kind of leadership style would be shown when a person acts as a leader, but uses and depends on more interpersonal relationship and building relationship with his peers and his teams. So these are 3 things that he looks at here. When you look at informational, then we also look at decisional. So these are 3 broad categories of how we can look at somebody can be a leader, but within the key particular leadership style have 3 variants in terms of being either a figurehead using interpersonal relationship, using informational, relationship to be able to show leadership, and in some cases decisive or decisional leadership in order to drive the organization. So these are further that we need to, analyze when we talk about how, let's say the leadership behaviors impact the organization. So an example that I will give you here, just to relate this to the fact, sometimes in organizations you would see that some of the key functions of the leaders are the person in the leadership or the chief executive. They are carried out by, vice presidents or directors within the organization or department heads within the organization. And the CEO is more keen on driving the organization from an interpersonal aspect, wherein what he is going to do is establish himself as a figurehead, as a leader, wherein people look up to or come up to in terms of problems and issues, or when things come to a bit of a standstill, and he basically kind of works as an intermediary between the board and the key operations side of management within the organization. So when I look at interpersonal, you would see this kind of role being enacted out when we see large projects being done. You would generally see the project manager or the lead project manager if it's a construction site, and some of you are based in, say, Middle East. You see a lot of construction, large projects happening, and what you generally see is that the CEO, the top people within the organization, the people who fund and approve the project are not on the ground. The project manager is on ground. Now, the role of the project manager is that he or she is not actually doing all the things on its own. They are looking at controlling, managing, planning, organizing, and reviewing some of the things. So in this case, the role of that lead project manager is basically driving the progress on the project, making sure milestones are being hit and the work is being completed. And he drives, or the person in that position actually drives those things using a leadership style which is going to be more focused and symbolic of being interpersonal. So he's a figurehead who represents the management. He's the person who also looks at sanctioning budgets, mitigation of risk, whatever it is. He's also providing leadership because he has experience within that sector, and that's why he's the lead project manager. But he's also a key worker who's an intermediary or a link between the management, who has signed off the project, or the key sponsor of the project, and the operations side of team, which is basically carrying out those tasks and activities. So when you look at this as an example, this is where you would generally see that person managing those things from an interpersonal side of the aspect of, the traits and skills which the person would have in that leadership position. Similarly, you'll have informational. So you look at situations wherein sometimes you would see there are regional CEOs, or there are regional teams of large organizations which are responsible for, managing revenue, sales, turnover in certain geographies. So when you look at the classification which most multinational companies have, for countries, so they have Asia, Asia Pacific, Far East, you have Middle East, Middle East, Africa, and MENA, as they call it, the region. Then you have Europe, Western Europe, and Eastern Europe, and then you have the Americas. So when we look at regional teams, sometimes you would see that if the businesses are expanding from one region or from one geography into other geography, you would see the person who's charged or given the charge to expand and open operations in other places would be more so exhibiting an informational leadership style. So here the main objective would be to manage, collect, sort things out, monitor things. You'll be looking at disseminating information, which is to ensure that people are able to take decisions who are on ground at the right time, at the right, in the right circumstances. And you would generally see that they would be spokesperson of the top management. So they would be basically, managing and coordinating some of these things. And they would essentially be the, say, for example, when I say spokesperson, literally being the spokesperson of the organization in that location for that project. And it is something that is going to be for a specific period of time. It's not going to be something which is going to be related to that person is going to be posted there, or, they will have a transformational role, but for a short period of time, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on the success in the, let's say the outlay of the operations in that particular region. So in those cases, you would see people would be drafted from different teams, which have the capability and the required skills and knowledge to be able to go in and explain or launch that operation, and their role is going to be more of informational. And then sometimes you see decisive or decisional making role that managers or leaders will essentially exhibit, and this is where you see primarily happening in the case of startup companies. So people who are going to be entrepreneurs, or serial entrepreneurs, they would be quite convinced and they have a very clear idea of way the things need to be driven. They would basically look at, taking decisive decisions in terms of making sure that the project actually succeeds. And they are going to be key in terms of looking at allocation of resources, looking at negotiating, for example, certain key elements of the project, or when it comes to budgeting, or when it comes to looking at, negotiating externally with, say, organizations. And in some cases, they would be, also people who would basically handle all issues and problems which will arise. And in those cases, you would see that that particular, person would be in a very decisional or a decisive leadership role, because they have to make, their decisions will actually make or break that particular project or that particular initiative that they've taken. And they tend to be in startup businesses or organizations when they're expanding with a new product concept or an idea into a new geography, and there needs to be an adaptation which needs to be done. So when we hear about local, that means go global, but also localize the product. And you would generally see that in those cases, some of these qualities which the person in the leadership position would show would be decisional or decisive, because they have done the research in that market that this is the only thing which works and this is the only way going forward. So they know very clearly how things are going to work and how things are going to be made to work. And that is where you would generally see this side of, the role coming into play, or the skills which the leader would essentially show, and that would help cover this particular task. So here, the analysis part of it requires us to cover, the Mintzberg 10 management role, which he further classified, and how they relate to the leader exhibiting these roles in some cases when we classify them into 3 different types. So any questions on this so far?
No problem.
Okay, that's good. Okay, let's look at a small quiz just to look at understanding if you've understood some of these things correctly. So we're looking at a brief quiz which will basically talk about, what we've discussed today. So let's look at understanding the first question. Now, which type of leader believes workers should be involved in decision making?
Workers. It's the laissez-faire.
So laissez-faire? Okay.
Yeah.
So people should be involved in the process of decision making between democratic and laissez-faire. So the correct answer should be democratic, because the democratic style of leadership, laissez-faire is abdication. The person gives up the responsibility of decision making altogether. So in this case, it would have been democratic. Now, which leadership style is most likely to encourage slack or laziness in the workplace?
That is definitely last one, laissez-faire.
Laissez-faire, that's correct, yeah. So that is laissez-faire, because there is a total abdication. They allow the things to take their own course, and in this case, the person isn't interested to make the decision, and that's why it's laissez-faire. Now, which of these statements best describes delegation? A team is created to improve quality. Authority is passed down the hierarchy. Staff and directors get to know each other. Management feedback to directors.
I think the first one, a team is created to improve quality.
Okay, so delegation means when you are basically passing the baton on, or you're essentially allowing other people to be able to make decisions. So in this case, a team is
Second.
created to improve quality, or is it going to be authority passed down the hierarchy? Which of these statements
Second.
best describes delegation?
Yeah, I think
It
the
will be
second one too.
That's correct, yeah. Now, let's look at which leadership style suggests that managers and leaders should change and adapt their style to different circumstances. So the clue is given.
I think the first one.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so should change and adapt their style to different circumstances, and that is where it will be situational. In which situation is an effective manager most likely to use laissez-faire management style?
First one, definitely.
First? Yeah. First.
Okay. So in this case, laissez-faire means they are basically going to abdicate the process of making decisions. And in this case, what they would do is let the situation take their own course. So in which situation an effective manager is most likely to take? Employees need greater training? Probably not. Employees are threatening industrial action. So this could be one. Employees are being made redundant. Probably a very harsh one. Employees are skilled and motivated. Probably not. So yeah. So in this case, I think you were right that it allows the employees to be able to make decisions, and that is why it was laissez-faire style. The term for shedding whole levels of management. Sometimes you would see that within the organization, there are lots of redundancies which are made at the management level. So what is the term which refers to this shedding or large-scale redundancies which happen at the management level?
Downsizing and expanding out of these two, there should be one of the answer.
I think it's disbanding or delayering.
I think it could be delayering according to me as well. So I think it is delayering, because what tends to happen if you look at Japanese companies sometimes, and when large scale fraud and scandals tend to happen, you would generally see that companies would actually look at reducing the number of layers. So it will be delayering, number of layers within the organization, because sometimes what happens is as organizations begin to expand, the delegation of power and authority tends to happen, or decision making tends to happen at every level. So over a point in time, what tends to happen is that there are lots of layers which get created, which slows down the whole process of decision making. And in some cases, when organizations looking at shedding management, they are trying to delayer or decouple the decision making process, speed it up, and that is why it will be delayering. Now, democratic leadership places emphasis on. So what is the key characteristic of democratic leadership style?
Rules and regulations.
I think it's delegation and consultation.
Delegation and consultation. Rules and delegation will be authoritative, because you have to follow the rules. If you don't follow the rules, you're out. So it's a carrot and stick approach. Delegation and consultation, because here the skills, the knowledge, and the experience are there, and the manager generally, or the leader generally, feels very confident that the team is able to carry out those tasks. So obviously delegation and consultation. Now, which of these is a disadvantage of democratic management? So we're talking about a negative aspect of democratic management.
It's definitely number 4 for me.
Yes, that could be. So if you look at staff are motivated to involvement, this is a positive aspect. We're talking about the disadvantage, so this is an advantage. Employees are more loyal to business. Again, that's an advantage because there's a democratic style. Employees get closer to customers. Maybe this is a big one. Decision making is likely to be slower, because in some cases, if too much delegation happens, you would generally see that the decision making process becomes slow, especially in a larger organization wherein there are lots of layers of management. Now, which management style means that all decisions are made centrally? This is an easy one. Yeah, authoritarian, correct. Then that should be the last one. Which of the following refers specifically to leadership rather than management? So again, differentiating between what is a leader and what is a manager. What is the concept of leadership or concept of management? So which of these specifically refers to leadership? motivating and inspiring others. Authority comes with position. Instructing and coordinating subordinates, making tactical and operational decisions. I think it's a simple one.
Yeah.
Motivating, inspiring.
Okay.
So we got to hear those key words when we looked at those videos: motivating, charismatic, inspiring, passionate. So obviously leadership traits that differentiate it from the management. So I think the two questions that we got wrong were, we know where we got them wrong, but I think quite happy with the result in the sense that you broadly understood what we've covered today, and that gets confirmed with the quiz that we've done. So what I'm going to do is upload this has been a longest session because it involved a bit of a introduction to the unit as well, and some of the other sessions hopefully will not be that long. But what I will do is just after the presentation, I'm going to upload a copy of the new presentation. You'll get a handout on leadership theories to read. That's a handout that I've created, which is about 9 pages, but it basically summarizes all the leadership theories nicely rather than read 50, 60 pages of the book. And then this particular article, which was done by Global Study, which talks about categorizing leadership from a modern perspective and approach, would be a good read because I think that is a very recent study and it gives you a modern perspective on how actually leadership and management styles pan out, within the organization.
That's great.
And I'll catch up with you in the next session. So if you think of any other questions or if there is anything else which comes up in the meanwhile and you have any queries and doubts, feel free to get back to me on email. You can email me on raman@ukversity.co.uk and I'll come back with you with some additional information.
That's great, Mr. Raman. I have a question. Basically, you covered some of the things in the second and third and also the fourth topics. So can I start reading the second topic before next week?
Yeah, definitely you can do that. I think I'm going to be looking at refreshing the presentations, but yeah, whatever are available on the Moodle, you can definitely read ahead, not a problem with that, and it'll form a good basis for some discussion and Q&A when I'm looking at covering those learning outcomes.
Great. I'll be attending next week too, because basically in the last 2 weeks, I've traveled from the country where I was visiting my family back to the country where I'm working, where I am right now. So that's why I've been a bit slow, but I still have one of the assignments to submit. So I'll be attending next week, definitely.
That's great. No problem. Good stuff.
Right,
so I'll catch up with you. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I know it's probably quite late now, 11-ish in the Middle East. But yeah, thanks for joining in and catch
thanks
up.
a lot. All right, have a nice day.
Thank you. No problem.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.